Inside each of us is the most complex object ever known. The human brain. A web of 86 billion cells, interlinked by more than 100 trillion connections. It's the source of everything humanity has ever created. It is what enables us to move, interact, feel, experience, and remember. And is responsible for everything that makes us who we are. Right now, we're experiencing a revolution in how scientists understand the brain. A revolution that could improve our mental and physical health, fast-track learning, supercharge our memory, and allow us to live our best lives.
Three, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 5. People have ever seen me live, or they've seen videos of me in front of audiences. Sometimes I'll do these demonstrations. 4, 9, 9. But afterwards, I always tell people, I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's possible, because the truth is, you could do this too. 7, 6, 1, 3, 2, 2. Regardless of your age, your background, your career, your education level, your financial situation, your gender, your history, your IQ, none of that matters. There's no such thing as a good or bad brain. There's a trained brain and an untrained brain. 8, 0, 3, 4. And the reason why I know this is possible is because when I was 5 years old, I had an accident, a traumatic brain injury that left me with some learning challenges. I had poor focus. I couldn't remember anything. I was easily distracted. I remember when I was 9 years old, I was slowing down the entire class because I wasn't understanding the lessons like everybody else. I was being teased for it, and a teacher came to my defense. But all I remember her saying was she pointed to me in front of the whole class and said, "That's the boy with the broken brain." So over time, I learned how to compensate and go from below normal to above normal. It's not true that genius is born. It's actually more true that genius is built. It's not true that intelligence is fixed like your shoe size. It's something that actually can grow over time with discipline and with training and practice.
Given the opportunity, of course most of us would want to be smarter. For much of history, it was thought intelligence was set at birth, and there was nothing we could do to change it. Now, thanks to advances in brain imaging technology, science is telling us a different story. We can make our brains smarter. While some of our intelligence is determined by genetics and biology, a significant portion is under our direct control.
Our intelligence is anything but fixed. In fact, our brain can change and get smarter every single day thanks to the gift of neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to modify, change, and adapt both structure and function throughout life in response to experience.
We know that the brain is very similar to a muscle, so if you use it, it gets stronger, and if you don't use it, it starts to atrophy.
So use it or lose it, essentially that is treating the brain as almost like a muscle, with the idea if you keep training that brain muscle, it will get fitter over time, more resilient to injury or disease.
This is a new understanding and does challenge the traditional notions and definitions of what intelligence is. But if you think of intelligence as being mentally smart, right? Being sharp, capable, resilient, flexible, have the ability to adapt to changing situations, to think deeply and novelly about new situations, then we do understand that with focused effort and practice, that those things can be modulated, they can be changed.
Our brains are changing from the moment we are born, as we learn about the world around us.
Learning is neurobiological, so the brain actually wires itself up based on experience, and learning is that experience. So our experiences that we have shape our brains.
At birth, each brain cell has an estimated 2,500 connections. By the age of 3, this number has grown to a whopping 15,000 connections.
In childhood, there's a really stellar increase in the number of synapses, which are the connections between those neurons or brain cells. And that's where the heavy lifting of the brain happens. That's where experience comes in and it gets essentially encoded by those connections.
So as we learn, we're not increasing the number of neurons, we are increasing the number of connections between them. We're increasing the number of synapses.
The neurons you had when you were born, they're the same neurons you're going to have when you die. There's very few parts of the brain that actually make new neurons, and principally that's the hippocampus, the part of the brain that's involved in making new memories. But basically for the whole rest of the brain, there is no other new cells coming in.
This means the most brain plasticity happens when neurons connect with each other in new ways. This is known as synaptic plasticity.
So synaptic plasticity is happening right now in your brain, in my brain, in everyone's brain, because it's the underlying basic currency of brain function and neuroplasticity. We're always responding to the environment.
As we move through life and gain new experiences, our brain is constantly remodeling. Some connections are strengthened, whilst others are eliminated. This is a process known as synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning is this selective loss of synapses, and it's a predictable event that happens in that young brain. And it seems to be for the purpose of having the right numbers in the right places and not just being overloaded with synapses.
While these unnecessary synapses are lost, frequently used brain areas get coated in a white fatty substance called myelin. This white matter speeds up nerve conductance by up to 100 times, creating fast brain superhighways. This streamlining of the brain's circuits enhances our general intelligence, or what scientists call cognition.
Cognition is just our capacity to think, reason, understand, solve problems. It's how our brain works. It's sort of the output, right, that we see every day of what our brain is doing to process information. And it can happen in very complex ways, it can happen in very simple ways, but it's happening all the time as we're awake. Cognition are sort of the output of the wheels turning inside the brain.
By the time we reach adulthood, we have about half the number of synapses we had at age 3. Yet the brain is still strikingly complex.
So the brain is so complex that if we were to actually map out every single possible connection from one neuron to another, there'd be more connections than there are atoms in the universe.
It was thought that once we reached adulthood, this universe inside us was unable to change. We now know this process of forming new synapses, strengthening existing ones, and losing others continues throughout life.
Think about an engine that can be constantly upgraded moment to moment by everything you do to make it either work better or work less. There is no rocket ship that's designed with the intricacies of neuroplasticity.
But neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. Just as we can do things to enhance our cognition, we can also do things that deplete it. often without even knowing it. Modern life doesn't foster a healthy environment for our brain. It is constantly challenging our capacity to think, focus, learn and grow. And when it comes to building a brighter brain, there's one crucial factor that can help or hinder us: how we use technology.
The reality is that technology is here to stay. Whether we love it or loathe it, we have to find healthy and helpful ways to integrate it into our lives. And I believe the secret to doing that is understanding the neurobiology around how our bodies and our brains operate in this digital landscape.
On October 29th, 1969, the world's first internet message was sent between two computers in California. It consisted of the letter L followed by O, then the system crashed. Since then, the internet has become the most widespread and rapidly adopted technology in the history of humanity. In only decades, it has completely reinvented the ways in which we search for information, consume media, and manage our social interaction. In a typical minute in 2019, 18.1 million text messages were sent, over 87,000 people tweeted, and more than 390,000 apps were downloaded across the globe.
I think most of us would agree that we are tethered to technology. We often say we are using technology from the womb to the tomb.
While technology continues to evolve rapidly, the human brain has hardly changed in 40,000 years. As our everyday lives are increasingly played out in the digital realm, it is having some unforeseen consequences.
Put simply, the human brain is not designed to operate in the digital world that we found ourselves in. We have ancient Paleolithic brains. We have brains that were hardwired, pardon the pun, to go and forage, go and hunt and seek for information at a time that was convenient and at a pace that was convenient and suitable for us. But in the digital world, what's happening is information is constantly being thrust at us, and our brain is physiologically incapable of coping with that constant onslaught.
When it comes to information, more is not better. Instead of working smarter, our brains are just working harder.
I talk about the 4 horsemen of the mental apocalypse. How technology is affecting the human brain. The first one is digital deluge. Digital deluge is this information overload, where it's creating a sense of overwhelm. Many people feel like there's too much to learn and too little time. We're drowning in information. It's like taking a sip of water out of a fire hose.
This deluge of information creates a brain paradox. While our brains have trouble with large volumes of information, we humans are driven to constantly seek it out, because our brains have evolved to thrive on novelty.
We evolved in an environment where there wasn't a lot of information. And any information that was there might prove to be very valuable. So for example, a little rustling in the bushes might mean a tiger's gonna leap out at you. So our brains evolved this thirst for knowledge, this desire to take in new information.
Today, new information is available in almost unlimited supply. As the brain tries to process information whilst driving itself to search for more, it becomes overworked.
Given that our brain has a finite capacity, this is why so many of us feel like we're overwhelmed and drowning. I often refer to this as infobesity.
In this world today, we're exposed to 20,000 times more information than people just 20 years ago in their lifetime. The more information we take in, the worse our brain becomes, the more fragile, less dependable.
This impaired function is known as cognitive overload.
The organisation of the brain is actually really simple. It has 4 principal lobes: the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and then the last lobe at the front, the one that makes us human, is the frontal lobe. It's the things that give us executive decisions, personality, understanding, forethought.
Cognitive overload reduces the processing power of the frontal lobe. This can leave us unable to think clearly, make even minor decisions a struggle, and make us feel foggy or irritated.
So the problem with taking in too much information, because obviously it seems like, oh, if I take in more, I'm going to be smarter. What we find is it freezes the brain, it stays at a shallow level of processing, and we don't know what to do with it. If I were to say to you, hey, let's go to dinner tonight, there's these 10 new restaurants, da-da-da-da-da. Oh, pretty soon you'd be like, no, you just pick one. But if I said, let's go to a new restaurant, there's 2, blah, 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 you can pick it. Our brain, there is a capacity overload that we just kind of say, no, no more.
To clear the brain fog, lower anxiety, and get back clarity of mind, we need to dam the digital deluge and take in less information. We do this using strategic attention.
Strategic attention is our ability to filter information in order to focus. As we utilize strategic attention, we set the stage for other cognitive capacities that are more complex. In other words, the degree to which I can pay attention closely to the information I've decided is important is the degree to which I can do anything with that information.
When we practice limiting our information intake, we strengthen our brain's circuits for strategic attention.
So restricting, delimiting, inhibiting the amount of input actually makes us bigger thinkers, strengthens the brain's function, and it makes us more innovative. The people that know how to block 95% of information are the smartest people.
The brain also works smarter when it slows down. Connections are built when brain activation decreases or when the brain is at rest. This is why taking some time out of technology altogether can help us think more creatively and come up with new ideas.
What we know is that when we digitally disconnect, we enter what neuroscientists call the default mode of thinking. This is where we enter a mind-wandering state. We used to call it daydreaming, but today we fill our white space with scrolling of the screen. We don't have moments of opportunity to be idle and to be bored. And being unplugged and entering that daydreaming state is absolutely vital for our physical health, for our mental well-being, but it is also critical for ideation and problem solving. I don't know about you, but I've never had a genius idea in my inbox or in an Excel spreadsheet. But I most certainly have come up with a creative idea or a solution to a problem when I've been in the shower, when I've been for a run or a swim.
Information overload isn't the only way digital technology is zapping our brain power.
The second horseman of the mental apocalypse after digital deluge is digital distraction. How do you maintain your concentration in a world full of rings and pings and dings, in a world full of app notifications and social media alerts? With every like, share, comment, cat video, we're being driven to distraction.
So the digital pings and alerts that punctuate our day, I almost believe they're the soundtrack of the modern day. What these do is divert our attention. When we hear something, and we may get the physiological tingle or the ping as well, that vibration, what this does, it diverts our attention because these alerts and notifications trick our brain into thinking that everything is urgent and important. Research tells us that the average adult can spend just 6 minutes on their focused work before a digital distraction, i.e. alert, a notification or a ping, diverts their attention. Just 6 minutes.
Each time we switch focus, we compromise effectiveness and brain power. Even the smallest distractions can dramatically reduce productivity.
Research tells us that when we are distracted, it takes the average adult 23 minutes and 15 seconds to reorient their attention back to that deep focused state. So imagine you are working on some data analysis, or you're writing a proposal, you're doing some deep focused work, and the ping of an email or a calendar reminder. What happens is our attention is diverted, and it takes us almost 24 minutes to get back into that deep focused state. Significantly costly when we think about the number of distractions coming into our day now in the form of digital intruders.
Our digital devices have been purpose-built to hijack and hold our attention. One way they do this is by exploiting a powerful cognitive quirk called a variable schedule of rewards, or intermittent reinforcement.
So the mechanics of that intermittent variable rewards imitate what is often used in poker machines. It's that unpredictable reward ratio that gets us hooked onto repeatedly using the technology. If you knew every time you were going to share something on Instagram that you would get a certain number of likes, it would be viewed by so many people, we wouldn't feel compelled to keep checking in.
Social media leverages the same neural circuitry used by poker machines and cocaine to keep us using their products as much as possible. Playing poker machines creates an intense anticipation as the wheels are turning. The moments between pushing the button and when the wheels stop triggers a release of the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine.
Have you ever paused to consider why you pull down on your phone while you're waiting for your social media feed to refresh? When we pull down, there's an intentional gap between when you have pulled and when the content is loaded on your screen. This gap is intentional to give you a sense of anticipation. You get a hit of dopamine as you anticipate what is going to arrive in your inbox, on your social media feed. And again, these subtle mechanics keep us hooked on these platforms.
Dopamine motivates us to do things we think will bring us pleasure. It gets released when we eat delicious food, have sex, exercise, or have successful social interactions.
Oh my God, you are a stunner.
When we anticipate a reward, we go into our inbox expecting an email from a colleague telling us we've done a good job. We go into social media to check how popular one of our latest posts have been. We often get a sense or a hit of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Now, dopamine does two major things in the online world. The first thing it does is that it drives us to continue doing that behaviour. This is why we find it so hard to stop binge watching television, why we find it challenging to stop the scroll or to end the video game that we are playing, because that dopamine hit has been associated with pleasure in our brain. And so our brain craves more and more of it. The second thing is that it impairs our capacity to regulate our behaviour.
When we like, swipe, scroll and binge, dopamine floods our prefrontal cortex, the brain's impulse control centre located in the frontal lobe.
It is the part of the brain that says 3 hours of Netflix is enough, turn it off and go to bed. It is the part of your brain that says you are done checking your inbox, shut the lid on your laptop and go to bed. But when you are getting hits of dopamine, instead of making those good choices, we find ourselves 6 hours later still sitting in front of the TV or the laptop.
This behaviour uses our brain's plasticity against us. Every time an action results in a reward, it makes the association in our brain stronger by strengthening synaptic connections, making us want to perform the behaviour more.
Because your brain's like a muscle. When it does something, when it engages in certain thoughts, certain patterns of thoughts, certain actions, you strengthen those connections in your brain, you strengthen those networks, and they become easier.
As we get more overloaded with information and face more distractions, many of us resort to multitasking to make up for lost time. The term multitasking was coined in 1966 to describe the ability of computers to process several tasks at once. But humans are not computers.
Now, multitasking is a myth. You can't actually multitask. Humans are very single-minded. They can focus on one thing at a time. And when people think they're multitasking, they're actually task switching. They're switching rapidly back and forth between the tasks. And that's not a good thing because all that switching comes at a cognitive cost.
Do you realize that multitasking is probably one of the most toxic things for your brain health? Because we now know that multitasking is to the brain as cigarette smoking is to the lungs. When you are a chronic multitasker, your mental health is severely impaired, depression, stress, anxiety, significant increase. Your memory significantly decreased. People that are chronic multitaskers' brain looks sometimes just like someone with early Alzheimer's disease.
The hallmark symptom of Alzheimer's is memory loss, caused by the progressive shrinkage of the hippocampus, a brain area critical for learning and memory.
So we see the hippocampus, that it's shrunk, it's reduced in size over time in people that are chronic multitaskers. And what we think is happening is that when you're a chronic multitasker, it actually pours cortisol, which is the stress hormone, into different regions, which is very toxic for our neurons.
The brain releases cortisol with the aim of speeding up responsiveness, but it also has a nasty side effect of damaging this critical area. And it's not the only area affected by multitasking. MRI scans found that multitaskers had less brain density in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region responsible for empathy, as well as cognitive and emotional control. It also has damaging short-term effects.
First of all, things slow down because it takes time to switch. You have to reconfigure your brain from one task to another. And that means that a lot of the valuable brain processing time is taken up by switching. The other thing the brain has to do, it has to not only reconfigure itself, but it has to backtrack a little bit, figure out where it left off on the first task when you switch back to it.
Unfortunately, multitasking does not help us to be more productive. When we multitask, we know it takes us roughly 40% longer to complete both tasks compared to if we had done them as single tasks. We know our error rate increases by around 50%.
Sometimes the error rate is even higher and has dire consequences.
A fascinating study was reported in 2016. In America, the third leading cause of death behind heart disease and cancer was medical errors. A chief component of these medical errors involved doctors and nurses prescribing and/or administering the wrong medications and/or dosages.
To see how these dangerous errors could be mitigated, researchers at the University of California began a study across 9 hospitals in San Francisco.
They found the reason was because staff were being forced to multitask whilst administering or prescribing medications. And so the staff at this hospital came up with a low-tech intervention. They had their staff wear a fluorescent coloured vest with the text "Do not interrupt" on the back.
Other interventions included establishing quiet zones or making announcements at key points in the day when medications were being administered.
Over a 36-month period, what resulted was a staggering 88% reduction in medication errors. This exemplifies just how ill-equipped our brain is to constantly be multitasking.
So you're losing time and it's costing you mistakes. And if that wasn't reason enough to just focus, it also costs you energy. Every single time you go from task to task, back and forth, you actually burn more brain glucose. So if you suffer from mental fatigue or brain fog, it could be because you're switching too much from task to task and it uses up a lot of your mental energy.
Multitasking also depletes our ability to innovate and think outside the box, which is key to coming up with smart solutions.
It limits your creativity because the way memory works is memory is like a garden path of associations. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, a vast network of associations. And where do creativity come from? Where do new thoughts come from? Where do new ideas come from? They come from following that garden path of thoughts, of memories, of associations from one to another until you get to somewhere that's brand new. Or you put two old things together and make something new out of it. Well, if you're spending all your time, all this valuable brain processing time, switching and backtracking and error correcting, you're not allowing your brain to go down that garden path to new places.
There is a simple way to defeat this digital horseman. Just do one thing at a time.
You practice monotasking, practice focusing on one thing at a time, and your brain's networks, your brain will adapt to that, and you'll become better at monotasking, better at focusing. And the quality of your work will improve. You'll feel less fatigued at the end of the day.
Taming our tech habits can not only change our brain for the better, it can break the dopamine addiction loop and restore our brain's master coordinator, the prefrontal cortex.
Simple things like disabling alerts and notifications. You can now, with all platforms, batch or bundle your notifications to come through at a time that is convenient to you, not to be peppered throughout your day. You can activate Do Not Disturb mode when you need to get that deep focused work done. You can switch your phone to grayscale. We know that scrolling social media is far less appealing to do in grayscale than it is to do in color.
You control the destiny of your brain, or you're the architect. We literally can learn to manage our brain's focus, our brain's energy. Do not allow your brain to be distracted. Do not get up and go look at your phone. Don't go have a conversation. Don't respond to an email. Focus on the task at hand. You will see a big difference in your brain's energy, your productivity, and your innovative thinking.
I don't know about you, but for me, it's comforting that these small steps can help harness our brain's neuroplasticity for good. However, when it comes to getting smarter, information overload and digital distraction are not the only challenges we face.
And the third horseman of the mental apocalypse is digital dementia. Now, this is a term in healthcare that you're going to hear more and more about. This is the phenomenon of where we're so used to outsourcing our memories to our smart devices, and because of it, maybe we're not so smart.
Can you remember more than 3 phone numbers? Chances are, if you do, one of them was probably your childhood phone number when you did have to recite it. Teachers are telling us throughout the country that children do not recall their times tables and basic historical facts like they used to. Why? Because our memory-making capacity is changing. Information has become cheap. We can just Google things, or we can just ask Siri.
When we outsource our memory, we begin to impair not only our ability to remember, but our neural circuitry.
So we do have a whole generation of people now that are coming up who have never used a map. Actually, a whole generation of people who have never used a dictionary, have never used, all of these other things which are really important for our brains. And unfortunately, we know that if you don't use these abilities, then they will atrophy and you won't have them there to use later on.
A famous study of London taxi drivers showed this use it or lose it principle of brain plasticity in action. To drive the iconic black London taxi, cabbies must pass what has been hailed the most difficult memory test in the world, known as the knowledge. As well as dodging pedestrians and double-decker buses, cabbies must prove they can find 100,000 businesses and landmarks in a maze of more than 25,000 streets.
Right, St Paul's Road, left Wallace Road, by roundabout, sit down on the left.
It's on the corner, yeah? All right, all right.
In the year 2000, a groundbreaking study showed that London cabbies have a larger memory centre, known as the hippocampus, than non-taxi drivers. Scientists then went on to scan the brains of novice cab drivers before, during and after their training.
Over 4 years, they looked at the changes in the structure of the brain in the hippocampus. And what they found is that in the taxi drivers who passed the knowledge, there was actually a larger area in the posterior or the rear of the hippocampus.
These brain regions also appear to grow larger the longer the drivers were on the job. This shows our brain's ability to change and grow as it is exposed to learning and new experiences. Sadly, the opposite situation is true for many of us today.
So we now are using Wayfinder apps, so the apps on the phones to actually get around. They're also causing an issue in our brains because we're now not using our maps in our brains to actually get around.
The map in our brain is located in the parahippocampal place area. This important part of our memory not only records where we are and how we got there, but also what happened on the way and once we arrived.
That area that codes for where you are and the area that codes for what you did, which is called your episodic memory, are actually linked to each other. And if we don't have a good memory trace of how we got there because we've used one of the Wayfinder apps, then we then don't set down good memories of what we actually did there. And there's been some really nice research showing that people who use those Wayfinder apps don't remember as much about their day or what they did compared to those who actually use an old-fashioned map or get there just because they know how to get there because they've done it several times before.
Instead of outsourcing our memory, actively engaging in the recall task can help build a brighter brain.
So if you're going to drive somewhere that you haven't been before, print out the map and use that rather than actually using the Wayfinder app. Or just try to remember, all right? Exercising your brain by trying to remember how you've actually got to get there is actually a really positive thing and it's really good for your brain.
Even the smallest choice, like reading on a screen versus reading on paper, can have a large impact.
So there is a difference in the way we learn, whether it's on a screen or on paper. So actually reading from a real book results in stronger learning than it does when you actually learn from a screen. We know that if you give a student either a PDF, hard copy or a screen, they'll remember the information in the PDF much better than they will when they read it on a screen.
The physical nature of a book gives the brain cues, which it uses to encode the information.
We also know that there's links and anchors on a book that we can use to actually remember things. So when we remember a certain paragraph, we remember it based on where it was on the page, if it was at the top of the page or the bottom of the page, or if there was a picture there or a figure and so on. When you're on a screen, everything slides down and up, so you don't have all those links and anchors.
More than that, learning to read from paper versus a screen can actually affect the brain's structure.
Recently, there's been several studies come out showing that children who learn to read on paper have a lot more white matter tracts. This is an important area of the brain that actually connects different areas.
White matter tracts, the brain's information superhighways, facilitate information transfer between brain areas. More white matter means faster information processing.
And if you have a lot more of those tracks, it's going to have big impacts later on in life. So yeah, there is huge differences between the different mediums that we actually learn on.
However, if you have to learn from a screen, you can employ strategies to enhance your memory capacity.
When we're trying to remember or learn something new, if you have to do it on a screen, then writing notes is really important. Writing notes on a piece of paper results in much better memory formation. If you draw pictures, you actually even get better memory retention than if you actually write notes.
So I believe the most important skill to master in the 21st century is our ability to learn how to learn. Because in a world full of ever-changing information, our ability to be able to catch up, keep up, and get ahead, it's not even a nice to have, it's a must-have, if you will. So there are 6 tips to learning any subject or skill faster. Remember this, be fast. The acronym be fast. The B stands for believe. If you believe you can or believe you can't, either way, you're correct. The E is exercise, because practice makes progress. The F, forget what you know about the subject temporarily so you can upgrade your knowledge, skills, and abilities. And also forget about distraction, because there is no such thing as multitasking. It's a myth. And the A in Be Fast stands for active. Learning is not a spectator sport. So ask questions, take notes, and so on. And the S in Be Fast stands for state. All learning is state dependent, right? When you add emotions to something, you're gonna learn it and remember it so much better. And teach, when you learn with the intention of teaching, you take advantage of the explanation effect. When you teach it, you get to learn it twice.
We don't only outsource our memory to technology, we also hand over our decisions.
Finally, the 4th horseman of the mental apocalypse is digital deduction. Digital deduction is kind of like digital dementia, but instead of having to do with memory, it has to do with our ability to think. Meaning with technology does a lot of the thinking for us because technology has algorithms.
Need a new show to watch? Want something to eat? Or need a new outfit? You barely have to think about it. The internet algorithms have you covered. The downside is a reduction in critical thinking and analytical skills.
These complex thinking capacities, they matter to brain health because in our research, when we have given individuals the tools to positively impact, to train those capacities, we've seen improvements in their overall performance.
Professor Sandra Chapman spearheaded a program called the Adolescent Reasoning Initiative to teach teens how to learn instead of just what to learn.
So we were very interested in healthy teenagers. Could we help them to strengthen their brain during these years? We have now worked with over 90,000 adolescents. And regardless of the spectrum of where they start, whether they're failing in school, come from poverty, above poverty, or enriched communities, we have been able to double their performance in school, in science, math, history, and English by engaging the frontal lobes to be innovative thinkers, deeper level responders, rather than fact regurgitators.
The good news doesn't end there. It's not just the young who can improve their brains in this way. There's still hope for us older folk who want to make our brains smarter. Thanks to groundbreaking research, we can bolster our brains in just a few weeks.
So our research at the Center for Brain Health for the last 3 decades has identified some really core kind of strategies that help strengthen the brain, make it work faster, more energetically. When people engage in really kind of brain strategies that are evidence-based, we see the brain change in a very short period of time. Not over months and years, but literally weeks.
This program, known as the Brain Health Initiative, begins with priming the brain.
Well, to prime your brain, you want to do things like let it rest. Just do one thing at a time. So be very strategic and focused and not cluttered in your brain.
So recharging the brain for optimum performance is so critical. A lot of us think if we stop, we're going to fall behind. If we stop, we'll lose capacity. And what's actually true is that it's important to have moments of break, rest, rejuvenation, just as much as it's important to have moments of challenge, excitement, interest. So it might be something as simple as a 5-minute break wherein you take a brief time outside in nature or get a cup of tea that's your favorite.
Once primed and ready, the brain needs to be energized.
For your brain, what you do to pump it up is really when you engage in deeper level thinking. When you take in information, and not just superficially to remember it back, but you take it in, and then you make it abstract meaning from that at a deeper level, and you connect it with other information to create something new, and then you apply it to your everyday life. That's what we see makes people be very strategic in their thinking, but it pumps up their brain. And the third area that we give people strategies is what I call potentiating the brain. Our brain was wired from birth till death to really appreciate newness and innovate, create new things, the brain's greatest potentiator to engage in innovative thinking. So prime it by not taking in so much information, pump it by deeper level thinking, potentiate it with innovative thinking.
Results from the Brain Health Initiative have shown these 3 simple strategies have a dramatic effect on brain function and structure.
We've shown increase in white matter in the major connections from the memory center to the decision-making center. We've shown increases in the cortex, which is our higher order reasoning part of the brain. When you use these strategies, we see an increase in the speed of connectivity by almost 30%. That's massive. That helps people get back almost 2 decades of neural health.
They have developed a simple way you can improve your brain health every day using these strategies.
One kind of quick and easy formula that is very helpful, the 2 + 5 + 7 formula. So I'll tell you that 2 + 5 + 7 equals brain health. We encourage folks to take and identify 2 key priorities that require their deep thinking every day. To set aside time to work towards those 2 key priorities. So for example, you'd say, I'm gonna set aside, I'm gonna put it on my calendar, 2 45-minute times throughout my day that I am going to forward myself in some way, personally, professionally, some meaningful way for me. And I know that those times are gonna take my deep thinking. All right, so that's the 2. 5 is taking a break. 5 minutes, 5 times a day for a brain break. Now, a brain break is a moment in time where we actually get to shift our brains into neutral, right? So it's a time of no directed thought, so that we allow our brains to take a moment pause and move out of that kind of high, complex cognitive thinking into something that is more neutral and relaxed. It gives the brain a boost. So that's the 5. And then 7 is to notice and or do 7 new things every day. And that is to harness and to begin to train the brain to think more flexibly to notice new things in our environment, which we may have become very accustomed to, right? To make innovation second nature.
These 7 new things can be as simple as noticing something new on your commute to work, or asking different questions than you usually would when talking to a friend or a loved one.
So it doesn't have to be big, it can be small, but it does need to be meaningful to you. So whatever that is to you, to me it's appreciating nature, enhancing my relationships, but for someone else it might be something different. Even taking a different route on their walk around the neighborhood could be something new.
Building our brain doesn't just help us get smarter right now, it helps us to stay sharper as we age by building cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve can be thought of like a mental bank account.
Cognitive reserve is just like a financial reserve, and we're building a wealth of resources or reserve that we can, if we need to, make withdrawals from.
Withdrawals are anything that can impair our brain, including degenerative diseases like dementia or other neurological conditions, such as Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, stroke, or even an injury.
Cognitive reserve is almost like our shield to protect us from the ill effects of disease and degeneration. So at any time, if we're confronted by some kind of injury, or you start to develop Alzheimer's disease in the brain, if you've got more of this cognitive reserve, you may not necessarily even know about the fact you had that problem.
So the more that we've made deposits into that cognitive reserve, the more we can rebound, regain capacity.
Certain behaviours offer a significant opportunity to improve your cognitive reserve.
Cognitive reserve is really easy to build up because it's just 3 things. It's mental activity, social activity, physical activity. Those 3 things throughout the lifespan at any time in the life are key.
Trying new things, going for a daily walk, and finding social activities you enjoy all build cognitive reserve.
You got to keep the brain engaged and alive and being challenged, and that's about using it. And that means that you're less at risk for clinical symptoms, your brain's healthier, it's more resilient.
We make deposits into our cognitive reserve throughout our lifespan. So brain health is really so much more accessible than many people think.
Our brain is our most important organ, yet often our most neglected. But it's never too late to get smarter.
Let's say that when you were of driving age, you were giving a vehicle. And it was like a really good vehicle. But here's the thing, this is the one car that you're gonna have your entire lifetime. My question for you is, how well would you treat that car? How well would you maintain that car? You have one brain. So I want to remind you that self-care is not selfish. Care and love your brain. Learn about your brain.
This amazing miracle of an organ right inside your head is truly our greatest gift and asset that we need to take care of and focus on.
We can make our brains smarter. It just takes daily effort and attention and understanding the tools that we need and how to use them to improve our own brain health and in turn be sharper, smarter, and thrive in life.